and welcome to the second annual Cybersafe Day. It's an event where we bring the whole campus community together to focus on how to use technology safely and civilly, to share ideas and get our work done while protecting ourselves and our information. I'm Walter Kerner, FIT's Chief Information Officer. Cybersafe Day is truly a campus-wide event. All the displays you see, from the interactive exhibits in this lobby downstairs to the panel discussions you're going to experience, were conceived and executed collectively by our staff, our faculty, and our students. I just returned from a conference on information security in higher education, and I can report to you without question that the cyber awareness program here at FIT is unique in its scope and in its execution. It really is the product of collaboration of unconventional minds. You've all seen the reports in the media of major cyber breaches, ranging from Equifax to the Home Depot to HBO. We all know people who've been the victim of cyber fraud or identity theft, and we are all too familiar with the uncivil climate that pervades much of our online discourse. This day is about understanding the reasons for these trends and arming us all with practical steps we can take to avoid being victims, and in the case of cyber incivility, to be a little more sensitive about not being practitioners. Our first panel will focus on cybersecurity in the business world, whether as employees, individual professionals, or potentially as entrepreneurs starting new ventures. Cybersecurity has become an issue that customers, shareholders, and boards of directors care about deeply. Here to discuss the issues, the changing threats, and what we can do as current or future participants in the business world to protect ourselves and our data are Mark D. Shine and Bill Reinisch. Mark joins us from Marsh & McLennan, a global professional services firm with businesses in insurance, risk management, reinsurance, talent management, and management consulting. Mark is national co-chair of Marsh & McLennan's Cyber Center of Excellence. We're also joined by William Reinisch. Bill is a venture partner, and in addition, Bill is a faculty member and the acting chairperson of our entrepreneurship department. Please join me in welcome Mark and Bill. So if I don't hold this, can you guys all hear me okay? Yes. We can overcome the crowd noise and the loudness of Mark's socks? Should have worn louder socks. God. Oh, we need to use it for the recording. Sorry. All right. So now my joke wasn't recorded. Oh well. So in my opening remarks, we talked about some of the breaches that people have seen in the headlines. Can you folks talk about some of the recent breaches that have been out there and talk about how they're different and how they're similar?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Just make sure this is on. Great. Thanks for having me here today. Again, I'm Mark Shine, the National Co-Chair of the Cyber Center of Excellence at Marsh & McLennan. So we've heard a couple different breaches. We've heard breaches constantly in the news. Some of the more notorious breaches that we'll talk about and the way that these breaches had typically happened. The first was really the one that put the breaches on the map, which was a big box retailer. And this big box retailer is a place that we all shop at. And what most people don't understand is that this particular big box retailer wasn't actually breached themselves. What happened is their HVAC contractor, whose accounting system was linked to this big box retailer system, was actually the one that was compromised. We're seeing that a lot now. Hackers are now starting to go after the smaller entities because they realize that they can't get into the more robust systems that some of these larger entities have. So what they're doing, again, is they're targeting smaller entities to make sure that they get into the small entity and then to be able to get into the larger entity. So organizations now don't necessarily need to only focus on their own cybersecurity, but they also need to understand their cybersecurity of their vendors, their clients, and the colleagues. It's been a big shift ever since this particular breach. Another notorious breach that we had spoken about was an adult website for married individuals to go to get cheap and have affairs. And it was a very interesting breach for a particular reason that the group of hackers that went and breached this particular organization called themselves, they weren't hackers. They considered themselves hacktivists. For a moral reason, because they didn't agree with what this particular cheating website was doing. So what they did is they compromised the network. They sent this particular treasure trove of information to the parent company, said, take down the website or we're going to release this information. The parent company said, I dare you. The hackers sent them a small piece of, a small amount of information to show that they actually were in the system. The parent company still did not pull down the website. So what happened? The hackers released all of the information. This particular adult, cheating website never made it to the public listing on the London Stock Exchange, and the parent company of this particular website, again, never listed their IPO. So when we talk about valuations, think about how that affected the valuation, how a data breach can actually affect, when the company's trying to go, whether it's listing or how it affects their P&L. Not all breaches happen to large entities that we see on the news every day. Most of the time, these breaches are happening to organizations we're walking down the street to the pizza shop or to the new retailer, and we just don't hear those on the news. One other I thought was an important breach to speak about was through a media entertainment company. And by this particular breach, what happened is they went through social engineering. And by a show of hands, does anyone here know what social engineering is? Okay, great. So for the ones that don't, what social engineering basically is when somebody, a hacker or somebody else, is using different media websites to figure out what message you're trying to pursue or what you're doing. For example, they'll take a look at your Instagram, your LinkedIn, your Twitter, Facebook, so on and so forth. To know that if you're going away on vacation, they want to make sure on that specific time, they send an email to maybe the second in command. To that way, again, it's always an urgent email, things of that nature. So just going on, what happened is they compromised the credentials of the senior vice president of this global media entertainment company. This was the same entertainment company that was put out a movie about the leader of North Korea. And North Korea didn't like it very much, so they had threatened bodily injury and physical harm to the movie theaters that actually showed it. At the same time, they pulled off this social engineering attack where they compromised the credentials of the senior vice president. Because she had such a high credential, they had full access to the kingdom. What happened is this particular entertainment company was crippled. They were brought down to, again, this is one of the largest entertainment companies in the world. For 1 week, they had no computers and they were operating off of 100 Blackberries, the largest entertainment company in the world. So when we think about a data breach and how it can affect an organization, it's not just about companies that are collecting large treasure troves of information. It can happen to anybody.
Bill, what are you seeing from your perspective?
Sure. So when Mark and I prepared this discussion, we agreed, and Mark, I thank you for really reviewing what are probably the 3 most famous breaches that you've all read about in the New York Times and other media sources. As I've been here from FIT and transitioned out of being a venture capitalist and into being an academic, I've seen a lot of things change. And I want to point out 3 things I think are really relevant for this audience. We get all this stuff, we're going to watch it every day in the newspapers, on television, and it's going to keep coming, right? And then there's the ones you don't hear about. So for this community, I just want to take a second and mention 3 things that some of you probably heard about and some of you probably didn't even think about, right? So number 1 is department store you all know and love, hacked. Never really hit the front page of the press because it was just another hack, just another group of customers, information, Neiman Marcus, right? Gone, right? Didn't have the PR that some other people did. Second story you want to just put in your relevance. How many people here have taken an Uber? Okay. Did you know that Uber paid money to hide the fact that your information was stolen from them? Yeah. Okay. They actually paid off money because they didn't want this to hit the press. And then it hit the press later. And think what those people could do with the information while they're actually hiding it from you, right? And they're hiding it from what this information could mean to not only Uber's business, but from all of your businesses that use Uber, okay? Just to get from place A to place B, right? And the third story I want to mention, very high profile story, but nobody actually went deeper, right? You all heard the story in the news about Yahoo, okay? And Mark did a great job talking about the fact that all these entities, and we have to worry right now, the way hackers look at this, it's not looking at the small people, It's a supply chain. It's a link. They only need to break one link in the chain to accomplish their goal. They want, they're lazy by definition, right? Break the weakest link. Why do I need to break the strongest link in the chain? Doesn't matter, the chain breaks, okay? We have employees at all these large companies sending information to their personal email addresses, sometimes for good business reasons. If your personal email address happened to have been a Yahoo email address, that company was breached right then and there because the hackers had access to the personal email address. And the employee didn't intend to do anything wrong other than maybe send themselves a file to go look at it home that night. And that happened hundreds, if not thousands of times with the Yahoo breach. Employees just sending themselves an email saying, oh, finish up your work at home, right? Pass it on, and then just goes away.
So how many people had a chance to try the Have I Been Pwned station right out here? Yeah, the ones who look white and terrified. So when Mark mentioned the cheating website where the bad guys dumped the credentials, they dumped them in public places, and somebody put together a website called Have I Been Pwned that compiled all of the public credential dumps. And when you go to Have I Been Pwned, you can check and see if your email address or your password is in one of these public credential dumps. If your email address is in there, that's not that big a deal. If your password is in there, you better go change it, because that means that the bad guys have your user ID and password, and it wouldn't. Most people use that password for many different sites. So I'm going to make that available on the Cybersafe website, by the way, which I'm sure everyone here has bookmarked or will shortly. So changing from the breaches, let's talk about the attackers. During the election, it was discussed that the attacker was probably some, what was it, a 400-pound guy in his mother's basement, or whatever the phrase was? But I think the attackers have changed over time. Can you shed some light on who the adversaries and attackers are these days?
Sure. So I think it's a great point to start. We were just talking about earlier, you had sent me an email yesterday about the Russian government basically hacking a server and multiple routers that were being used within corporate America. So when you think about it, you're able to hack into the router, well, perhaps you're able to see everything else that's going on as well. Our clients, deal in the middle market space. When we speak to a client, the first thing that they say to me is, Mark, why does somebody care about my small ABC company? And again, to Bill's point, what he had mentioned, they're going after the small fish. They're hackers they're lazy, exactly to that point. They don't want to have to do more steps than they necessarily need to. Different types of attacks that we're seeing claims come in for. I would say that in 2017, the number one claim happened to be ransomware. Is anyone here familiar with what ransomware is? So Carbon Black did a study on ransomware, and what they had found in 2016, roughly $250,000 of ransomware was purchased. So within that, I think I actually have the exact notes. Within the $250,000, it generated, does anyone want to take a guess in ransom payments what $250,000 worth of ransomware was able to collect? Sorry? $1 billion. Not a bad return on investment. What's scary is in 2017, $6.24 million of ransomware was purchased. So if we think about the multiple that you were able to get on the $250,000 to get $1.1 billion of ransom payments, well, now you multiply that by 24, and what are we looking at? Roughly a $25 billion possible exposure in ransom payments in 2017?
It's a 4,000 multiplier, right? 250,000 to $1 billion is a 4,000 multiplier.
So,
and it's growing. It's growing. The multipier's not constant.
So ransomware is the biggest exposure that we're seeing. Now, how are they putting the ransomware in? Typically what we've seen is through social engineering, getting into the system, and then once they're into the system, that's when they upload the ransomware. And then again, our insureds are calling us saying, Mark, you know, our computer is locked down, we can't access it. They're asking for, it's always a minimal number, $300, $500 in Bitcoins, very small minimal number. Do we pay it or do we not? Now, I've had numerous conversations, both with Walter, and I've done a lot of events like this with the FBI. And the FBI's formal stance on paper is you never pay the ransom. If you speak to the FBI, you know, when there's an actual matter that's present, well, if you don't have backup redundancies and there is no, you know, other way, perhaps you have to. But that's the point of doing conferences like this, and I commend Walter for putting this all together, because it's, if you understand the best practices and you have redundancy systems and you know how to prevent a lack of just a siloed information, you're going to be able to get back up and running. It may take a couple days, but it's much better than not being able to get running at all, or taking a year or two, because we understand in 2018, if we're not able to service our clients' needs yesterday, somebody's willing to take them apart. Somebody's going to take them over, yet alone if we're not able to service their needs for a week, a month, a year.
So I'd like to make 2 additional comments. I think Mark's data is obviously entirely right. And so ransomware is what we're seeing go on, but you know, I take this very practical business approach. If you got your computer locked out and there's critical business information on it, I'm seeing a lot, and I've spoken to the head of the New York FBI on this. You know, they can make any statement they want. It's a business decision. It's a pure and simple business decision. Do I pay it or do I not pay it? And a lot of small companies are like, $1,000, I need the information. Boom. It's the cost of doing business. And $1,000 maybe it's not hitting these companies. And $1 million is going to kill some of these companies, right? And that's, you know, but, you know, by the way, that's, the attackers are getting smarter. They can't put the companies out of business because then they can't pay, because this is extortion. This is a pure and simple illegal market. The reason it's the most reported, it's black and white. Okay, if you got an employee's computer and it's not functioning and the information's on it, you're down. It's just black and white, and so the reporting goes easier. What we're seeing in the industry is the numbers that aren't being reported are the stuff that's not so clear. What about the fact that you have fashion designers now that their sketches are being stolen right off their laptops, right? And they don't even know, right? They don't even know. How could I report something I don't know, right? Because the bottom line is this is, you know, somewhere in the chain, they can copy the information. And they only need one place to take a copy of the information, and it's gone, right? And the amount of industrial espionage, okay, company to company, is growing exponentially. The amount of, and I want, you know, to Walter's question on hackers, you have the ransomware hackers. You have the business-to-business espionage, which is growing both in large companies and small companies. And some, you think it's all legal? Some of it's not. One of the largest breaches I had to get involved with before I came here was a company that set up a server and never bothered to change the password from the default. Okay? Never bothered to change the password from the default. So the entire world knew the password. This is a large company. Okay? The number of mistakes even are astronomical, right? So you got those. The nation actors, right? They're huge and they're not going away. Okay? You talk to people in 3-letter agencies that don't start with F, right? Okay? They're coming from more and more countries. Those are the ones you probably have to worry less about in business because they have different agendas, right? Whether it be your question of politics or something else. That's, you know, those agendas are usually not just to put a company out of business, right? They're much more politically based, okay? But then you also have 2 other groups of hackers which have emerged. There's, you know, everyone talks about the teenage kid. Yeah, there's a teenage kid, right? And they're really smart, right? But there's also now becoming this group of kind of professional rogue hackers, right? And to Mark's comment on social engineering, you run afoul of that community and the way things are going online, you take a stance that they don't like, they view it as their moral obligation to show the other side.
So how many people in this room store important data on the hard drive of your computer? So if that computer got ransomware, what would you do? So that's why, for FIT data, for stuff that we care about, store it in your Google Drive, store it on your network share, store it someplace where it is a backup for exactly the reasons that Mark and Bill were talking about. If someone ransomwares your computer and you have other copies of your data, okay, it's inconvenient, but you're not out of business. If that's the only copy of your data, then you got a problem. So it's an important thing to think about. So, and you started to go down this path, Bill, so I'm going to bounce it back to you. Can you say more about why the FIT community should care about cybersecurity?
I can try. So I'll give you a couple of reasons. It depends on which part of the community you're in. Obviously one part which I personally care about is the fact that we're growing people who are going to be future business people here, as well as future creative people, right? I did some work before I came on stage here today. All the creative people, this is going to be a part of your business. Intellectual property theft is a real concern. Okay, you're going to be out there, you have to protect your intellectual property. All the business people, you read any of the business reports, if you're going to be in management, this is a real concern for you. This is becoming a top item in boardrooms and companies across the nation and around the globe, right? This is a cost of doing business. This is part of, no different than HR or finance or operations or production or anything else. This is a real business discipline now that you have to deal with. So, we're growing the next generation of leaders and unconventional minds, creative people. You're all going to touch this one way, shape, or form, and we have to educate that generation to be smarter, right? Because this problem will not go away. If anyone thinks, oh, somebody's going to invent a widget that's going to make this whole problem go away, I'll put money against it, right? People are going to be the only solution to this problem with a lot of other things. So it's going to take educating a generation that deals with the world has changed, right? The other part is we here have a problem. Walter's the expert here. We have to worry about our own community here, both from the faculty, from the administration, from all the support people, and by the way, from the students, right? So I think I think those are both relevant.
So before Mark jumps in, to Bill's point about educating a generation, I was at a conference talking about security awareness, and somebody made the point that if you go back 20 years, 30 years, everybody smoked. Ashtrays, when I first started working back in the dark ages, there was an ashtray, you got a stapler and an ashtray. Everybody smoked. Every restaurant, every airplane, every bus, everything had smoking sections. And it's taken 10, 20, 30 years for widespread community education to talk about the health risks and the dangers of smoking and to change the public paradigm so that now a lot of people don't smoke and there are very few places where you can. It's going to take, as much as I would like to think that a one-day event like this is going to change the world, it's going to be years and years and years of awareness campaigns and too many people suffering bad examples. Mark, what did you have to add?
Sure. Just to add to that, when we're dealing with an underwriter and they're looking to basically underwrite a particular cyber risk, one of the key questions that they ask us is, does leadership care? Is this something leadership is doing bi-monthly trainings on, quarterly toolbox talks? Have they invested in technology, things like that? They want to understand that the culture of the company is really, believes in this and stands behind it. Because what we've seen is, in the event that you have a breach, is not the end of the world. If you've done nothing to prevent it or you haven't done any prior diligence, that's not a great thing. If you have and you do have the breach, it's not the end of the world. Back to your original question, Walter, of why should students at FIT care about this? Or I think your question was originally, why should FIT care?
Why should the community care? Teachers, faculty, staff, students.
So focus on the students at first. From the student perspective, I'm not terribly far from your guys' age. I'm about a decade probably older than most of the students here. I've taken cyber and I've made it my differentiator. I saw this as something that was an opportunity. This was something everybody was running away from, so I ran towards it. And I thought that if I was able to bring additional value or additional education on a particular subject matter like this would really be my differentiator. And I'm proud to say now, 11 years out of school, I'm now the national co-chair for the largest broker in the world. Saying if I didn't take that particular trajectory, perhaps things would have changed. And that's why when I say to the students, I think whether, you don't need to be the IT person in cyber, but you do need to understand the exposures and understand what you're doing with information. Why? Two reasons. One, customers are now much more aware of what's going on. They're going to be asking more questions. Certain vendors that you're dealing with are going to increase their certain levels of liability that they're holding you towards, whether it's insurance to indemnify them in the event that you do have a breach, or they might want to see certain security encryptions like 256 encryption instead of whatever. So we see it from, I think it's a real differentiator for the students. When you're going into a business, again, when you think data, it doesn't have to just be the data silo. Bill said it perfectly. It's like HR, it's like finance, except it's now part of each one of those divisions. When we're talking to an insured, that's exactly what we make sure, is that HR is talking about the policies and procedures, making sure that there's a classification policy and a data destruction policy and a BYOD policy, bring your own device policy. When I was in college, I was worried about the BYOB policies, for the parties. Now it's BYOD policies. But these are the kind of things, and that's an HR perspective. The finance, CFO, VP of Finance, they want to know, Mark, what is this thing going to cost me? If we have a breach, what is the likelihood of the bottom line impact to the P&L? And when we look at it, the Poneman Institute, which is the leading organization for cyber statistics in the country, quoted that on average, it's $7.35 million on average for the cost of a data breach. Now that incorporates, which we'll talk about I'm sure later on in the presentation, it's the first party expenses as well as the reputational harm. From a faculty perspective, and why the faculty should care about cyber risk, two things. One, you guys have your own exposure here due to the extensive amount of information that you have on the students. You're also dealing with different, not the regulatory bodies, but the actual laws themselves. You have, I'm sure, Grand Beach Piley here. You have FERPA that I'm sure you're dealing with. So all these different, laws bring into different responsibilities that the entity or the college or the university has to do. So I believe, again, from a faculty standpoint, you're going to be educating the students on new exposures. That's going to help them be a differentiator when they get out into the public. And then I'm sure we're going to touch upon later on in the presentation is the new regulation that's been coming on. And if there's for nothing else and you want to ignore cyber risk prior, you can't any longer because of this new regulation that's now coming into effect.
If I can add, I'll draw a parallel that I think might gel with some of our community here. So if you go back 20 years ago, in a lot of the industries we're in, sustainability wasn't the thing that it is now, right? It just wasn't there as front and center. I mean, there were people who cared about it, but it's become a real movement. Now what's happened? We fast forward in the last 5 years, saying you're sustainable means nothing. Right? I can put on a website, I'm a sustainable company. And, the millennials will look at me like, so what? What are you doing, right? Saying, you're green is zero, right? I mean, let's see the real meat, right? And now, even the companies that are really green companies have been called to task on, hold on, yes, you're doing X, Y, and Z, but what about this vendor? What about that? Yes, you're buying green fabric, but are you using, good supply chain? Are you shipping it well? You didn't ship it well. You didn't this. And they're really, the whole generation's become a lot more educated that if you really want to be a sustainable company, you got to be sustainable end to end, and this becomes a differentiator. My prediction, and I could be really wrong sitting here, we're going to see the same transition, okay? Because it's going to come through and we're going to see the same transition where people are going to talk about safety in cyber, and a couple people can say, yeah, we're cyber safe, yeah, fine. Right? And then they're going to get called to task on it. Right? And the companies that are having data on you as a customer. And you're going to start trusting the ones that don't only care that, yes, they have, strong passwords. The companies that really value your information and value what you say are going to be brands that are going to develop differently, just like they did in sustainability.
So if you look at the FIT community, and particularly the student community who's on their way out to joining the workforce, some folks are aiming towards positions in smaller startups or individual practices, and some folks are hoping to catch on with the big fashion companies or the big different large organizations. So we've talked about the changing threats. Can we talk about how companies are dealing with them? And there are some technical elements there and some risk management elements and some non-technical elements. And so I'm going to combine two questions here. Can we talk about what companies are doing to deal with the threats and maybe draw some differentiation between what big companies are doing versus what smaller organizations or individual practitioners can do?
Sure. So I think the easy question is, it really depends on the industry, I think, is the easiest way to divide that. Because what we've seen is, financial services, healthcare, banking, they seem to be fairly on top of it because they also have to comply with other regulatory rules. Other organizations, I would say not as much. What we see in the small to middle-sized businesses, again, these are organizations really the startup to about $100 million. We see everything in between. You see some of them with really robust cybersecurity task force and some of the best toys and tools and policies and procedures. And then you have other ones that are just as big that haven't done anything, that they're still using the Yahoo email, that they haven't integrated over and over. So I mean, there is, in the marketplace right now, we're seeing a huge variance of what organizations are doing. From a best practices standpoint, we work with our insureds. Again, we want to try and mitigate as much risk. We never want to put an insurance claim in unless we have to. So we try and work with them to prevent claims from coming in. So again, what we've seen from the Poneman Institute, depending on the year, Walter and I both agree that the employee error is a large percentage of what's causing breaches in 2017, because that's when the numbers were actually ran. So employee error is a big piece of that. I'm not sure if that started to answer the questions or not.
Well, it's a good start.
So
Bill?
let me pick up there and add two more. So employee error is by far, no matter which report you read, a huge number. And let me break that number up into two from what I see in all these reports. Number one is there's the employee error that's straight out error, and there's the employee error that's really, they don't know any better, right? They don't even think they're making a mistake, right? So, they actually think they're doing it right. So that becomes much more of a training issue. So as students get out into the workplace and, whether we're training them right, that's a whole part of this, right? Because they're like, this is the way we always did it. Why should I not do it that way anymore? I don't understand. I want to talk about two other parts of Walter's question, though. Big companies, little companies. So as I was preparing for this talk, I thought about this a little bit. Large companies, obviously larger budgets. They're worried about this. Hopefully they have Mark, already got them cyber insurance. They have people like Walter already in place, and they've patched a lot of the holes. Some of them haven't. Many of the ones you're going to work for have, but this becomes a front and center business discussion. The problem is the attackers are moving. Okay, this is a war, right? And the attackers aren't going to sit there and stay quiet. So one of the trends I've seen. Okay, let's talk retail or e-commerce, because bottom line, a lot of you are going to be in the e-commerce space in this business, right? Large companies all going to e-commerce. Okay, credit card theft, that was a great thing, and there's still a lot of it, right? Loyalty programs, people. Okay, if I steal your loyalty programs, how much are they worth? How much of your data is in there? It's like, don't go through the front door with a credit card, because that's the first thing they're going to protect. Go through the back door with the loyalty programs. And the big companies are starting to just right now realize how much information, how much duplicate information is in their loyalty programs separate from their payment processing systems, okay? Because loyalty programs have been a huge variable for them. Okay, now let's move over to the small companies, since Walter asked about it. Small companies, I mean, we could be And it probably happened yesterday. I saw a fair out in, our lobby here, right? People were selling stuff, right? They're taking credit cards, right? You're now in this business, okay? Having good practices about what kind of credit card processing system you are as a one-person maker business, and that you're not writing down credit card numbers, and that you have, and by the way, you can get it for free now, where you're getting a chip reader for your business. That's the same Square terminal or terminal from the bank that the large companies are using with the same security. You can get it to be at a flea market basically, or a maker fair, right? And those people who are going to take the time to just put that onto their smartphone and learn how to use it when it's a 15-minute video are going to be taking care of their customers differently.
And also from a liability standpoint, what Bill's mentioning is, I believe that's bringing you up to what's PCI compliant.
PCI, yeah, the Square terminal is now PCI compliant.
So again, and if a breach happens, you're not PCI compliant, the fines and penalties are going to be double and triple. So to what Bill is saying, doing the prior due diligence, the 10-minute chip reader onto your smartphone before you start accepting Square, if that's the company that you choose to use, well then that's something you need to really think about. The one thing that I would make sure that I mention, whether it's whatever entity that you guys do engage with from a credit card processing standpoint, you want to make sure that you're reading the merchant agreements, because typically the merchant, the business, the retailer, whichever organization that you're going to go work for or start up, is indemnifying the merchant processor in the event of a data breach, even if it's the merchant processor's fault. So what does that really mean? And this is very important for you guys to understand, is that the information, the way that the law is reading it, is cradle to grave. So if you create the information, like in a loyalty type of program, and then that loyalty program is compromised later down the road, whoever created the information, whichever the retailer was that created all of the data to make the original loyalty program, that would be the retailer on the hook and be responsible for all of the first party responsibilities in the event of the breach.
So
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but I'll put a little different slant on it and slightly disagree. If you've ever read any of those agreements, it's like, the agreements where, you download a free piece of software and they say, read the terms of service. Who reads those, right? It's like, click here, I agree, right? You're supposed to read them, but you don't, right? So if you don't, we got to actually be practical and say, okay, are you actually taking diligence to make sure you have a reputable vendor? The banks are all getting involved in this if you're a one-person operation, and the banks are really, concerned about this. But the thing I would say that the banks, for example, and the big players are not doing, you might download a service from one of the banks that you open up an account with an LLC tomorrow, and then 6 months from now, let's say your business is going great. You're suddenly switching software. You never bother to go backwards. And that's where the holes happen, because you never bother to say, okay, we're going to change our bank, and we've got to plug the hole that we just created by changing our bank, or we're going to change what software we're going to use. We're now going to, we were doing some free software online to do an e-commerce thing, and now suddenly I got some new software developer that's going to do it. Well, that can create a hole just by moving.
So let me try and put a bow on this discussion. I think there are three broad categories of things you can do. Some of them are technical, like just getting a good chip reader that goes in your phone, Square, or I don't mean to plug for Square, but so depending on
talk to any bank. Every bank has it.
Yeah. So depending on whether you're a big company, or a small company, you might spend a lot of money or little money, but go get yourself a free chip reader. Go set your computer so it downloads the updates automatically. The average data breach, does everybody know what the phrase 0 day means? A 0 day means an attack that was invented today. Today is the 0th day of its life. It's its birthday. Everybody talks about 0 days. The fact of the matter is that the vast majority of breaches take advantage of vulnerabilities that have been out for at least a year, and nobody bothered to patch them. And patching is typically sort of free, except for some time, but the patches are free. So there's technical stuff. There's education stuff. like coming to days like this, like reading our Cybersafe website, like being aware, by just using your head and saying, before I click on this free gift certificate from a store that I've never shopped at in my life, is it possible that it's a phish? And the last would be, let's call them risk management / procedural things. Go buy a cyber insurance policy. So if something bad does happen, the risk is handed off to someone else. Read your agreements. Follow some of the hygiene processes that Bill talked about, like making sure that if you transfer from one vendor to another, you're closing off access to the old one. So if you can remember this idea of 3 broad categories: technical, educational, risk management, I think that'll help you a lot. We're getting towards the end, but I wanted to, we couldn't have this discussion without talking about the Internet of Things, which is the new term of art. So in the old days, the internet was computers, but now the Internet of Things is your watch, your car, your refrigerator, potentially garments, jewelry, all kinds of things that can talk over the internet. I'm going to guess that everybody in this room has got at least 2 items on them that have some cyber capability, whether it's your phone, smartwatch. Car fobs don't yet talk over the internet, but they are electronic devices that you could hack to steal somebody's car. And by the way, a car fob, the remote control for your car, has more compute power than the rocket ship that went to the moon. So let's talk about the Internet of Things. What are the threats? What can people do about it?
Sure. So the nice part about the Internet of Things is it's giving organizations much more information on their particular client. It's letting them know what their activities are. It's letting them know how to dissect kind of the information. The problem is, it's also giving them all of that information. In the 90s, data was king. Now, really, data is a liability. And how long were you collecting the information from these particular Internet of Things products? The problem that we've seen in the beginning stages of the Internet of Things was it was created just like the internet. It was created to share information, and it wasn't necessarily created to secure the information that it was collecting. That's a big problem now, especially when these Internet of Things products are going across different jurisdictions, both here in different states in the United States and also within other countries. One of the more notorious breaches that recently had just happened was with a large sports apparel company that acquired this fitness tracking app that had a breach of 150 million users. They wanted to collect more information on these particular individuals as they're working out with their heart rate and things like that. If this particular fashion company, the retailer, would have done more diligence into this particular Internet of Things company, I bet that the valuation would have been much less, and this retailer probably would have done much better in the deal. So when we think about, again, Internet of Things, it is directly applicable to your guys' industry, more so than most industries, because it seems like Internet of Things products, it was going into the washers and the dryers and things like that, and it really seems like the new wave is going to be integrated into wearables.
Yes. So
Bill, just before you jump in, so why does it matter if the bad guys have information off your smartwatch? Or why does it matter if they have all this information off your Facebook account or whatever? One really good reason is that it lets them construct a really believable phish. So if I know that you use brand X smartwatch and I know you go to the gym, at such and such, and I got your location data, I can send you an email saying, hey, just to pick a sport apparel company, Nike, and that's not the one he was talking about, but hey, I'm from Nike and I see you use our smartwatch and we're doing a joint deal with Chase Manhattan Bank, and sign in and we'll give you, 3 weeks free at the gym of your choice or whatever, and suddenly you're giving up your banking credentials. So that's, when people say that information is harmless, anything that lets the bad guys write a more believable social engineering attack against you is not harmless. I'm sorry, Bill.
No. So, think a couple of things on the internet. So the Internet of Things has been through a major transition. There are some technical differences, which I'm not going to go through for this audience, but you've all lived through the computer era. The Internet of Things is going to be another era, and technically we're going to go through the same learning curve, right? And unfortunately, that's just a fact of technology. So, you know, there was a time where people were saying, you know what, I'm not safe online. Now, whether that's changed or not, we have a whole discussion, but people were just saying, you know, forget about it, right? You know, if whatever you put on Facebook, the whole world knows, right? Now we've seen where that's taken us into a different part in the country, right? Same thing's going to happen in the Internet of Things, but it's going to happen differently, and it's going to happen on a different scale. It's hitting a couple different areas. We're talking about areas like some of you have seen, you know, whether you have an Alexa in your house, whether you have, you know, a washer or a dryer or a refrigerator that's now connected to the internet, right? And what does this know about you? But then we have the car, by the way, and cars have now been hacked. Full disclosure, I'm involved in this discussion so that they can take control of your car while you're driving, right? And there's been stuff going on there. And this has already been proven. This is not sci-fi, this has happened, right? Okay? And every one of you who drives, this is a concern now, right? And the car companies are actually way behind in the learning curve and getting caught up very quickly. But for our industry, we're going to go to the wearables, okay? And you think wearables, smartwatches. They're going other places. We've had entrepreneurs come to this campus and talk about yoga pants that are connected to the internet, that exist today, okay? To Walter's point, these things have a purpose, okay, and how they're designed, but they can be misused. They can be misused both against you, against other people, and against other things you never intended them for. You're trying to track your workout, your fitness, okay, and meanwhile, these same people, you ever get the Google thing which says, are you logging in from California right now? I'm not. I'm sitting here in New York. But if my yoga pants is sitting here in New York, it knows, are you logging in from New York? Sure it does, because it knows where my yoga pants are unless I'm not in them, right? So bottom line is you can misuse the information very easily, and the attackers have now looked at multi-dimensional attacks. So they're going to use this information.
It's certainly creating, there's many more ports, which now create many more vulnerabilities. And again, this is where the integration between business and personal start to really blend together. Because if something happens on your personal cell phone, but you, like Bill had mentioned, you send that email from your personal cell phone to your work email, well now did you just compromise the work network?
Yeah, and to the people, you can walk into a company, you could be walking for the best cybersecurity company in the country right now, who has the best buttoned up system, and I walked in after going to yoga class at lunch wearing my yoga pants, I now have a threat vector.
And, you know, Google, I'll show you personally, Google has figured out that Walter Kerner, who works at FIT, is the same Walter Kerner who lives in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And more than once, I've surfed the web at home on my personal computer, not connected to the FIT network, and then come into work and opened up my browser and gotten an advertisement for the thing I was looking for at home. Because Google's figured it out, and they're going to figure it out. I won't say that I'm the guy in the yoga pants, because that would be a tough image for you to get out of your head. But
Whatever you want, Walter.
Loose-fitting yoga pants, I promise. But they're putting it together. And to Mark's point, as a risk management professional, he's saying, don't keep the data. Your marketing department is saying, take every piece of data you can find. So that's a real hard balance to keep.
But it even gets worse, because right now we're saying, not only that, we're saying to people, you want some of these services. You want the yoga pant company to be saying to you, by the way, Walter, you know, you should be going and doing this exercise and that exercise, and you should be looking at this food product. And we want some of these services. So there are ways these things are going to connect, because we're asking for those products.
So amazingly, we're up against time. So we're going to have to leave it here. I want to we're going to have a second panel starting in 15 minutes on cyber civility. In the 15 minutes, we're going to reset the stage. I would recommend everybody go out, check whether their password has been pwned, look at our exhibits, check the Cybersafe website for follow-up material from this day. I want to thank Bill and Mark, and thank you all for coming.